Hello! Today I want to show you some fun ways to do event handlers. I'm gonna take this little alphabet here and I'm gonna make it scrollable and rotatable in different ways. Let us start by looking at the HTML of this. Here we go. I have decided to just use one index.html with everything in it. Apparently, we are starting from the bottom. So here you see the alphabet. This is just an unordered list with list items in it. A, B, C, D, etc. Then I have some CSS here. I just put some a method background here. I have set a font size on the body. And then I set some size values using viewport width. So this unit you see here, VW, that is viewport width. And it's basically a percentage of the window width, or the viewport width. Here we have the container item, which the whole list of letters belong in. And it has the ID scrollable here. Let's start by making the scrollable thing scrollable. Let's start with the bare minimum. Scrollable.addEventListener. And we want to listen for the mouse move. But what is all these letters here? Yeah, never mind. We got out an event here. And we can do something with the event. But first, I'm going to hide the sidebar. For you who aren't familiar with this and this and this, or actually everything, scrollable we can write because we set the ID here. An addEventListener is a function that attaches a function to a word on the element. So the browser keeps track of all these elements, and when something happens to them, it will tell the JavaScript environment that, hey, here's something going on here. And those things are called events. Here we simply say that I want to know when the mouse moves on you. And I send in a function, and this function will receive an event. Let's take a look at the event. I'm gonna log it out. Console.log event. Here we go. And refresh. And I guess we need a console. Whoop. Okay, so here's the mouse event. The mouse event contains a ton of things. We have the page X, we have the offset X, we have client X, client Y, This is basically numbers that tells us where the mouse pointer is. Here we have a number that tells us what buttons are pressed. These are the two things we're interested in today. Now that we have a general idea of what the mouse event does, we can use one of these values to scroll. So instead of logging it out here, I'm going to say scrollable, which is the element we're listening to, dot scroll left equals event.clientX. Let's see what happens. So this kind of works, but what we're doing here is taking the position, the left position of the mouse pointer, and applying that directly to the scroll value for this element. And we need to do a little bit better, otherwise we can't really scroll any more than one window width. What I want to be able to do here is click the mouse and grab something and scroll. In order to do this, we need to know how far the mouse moved since the last move. And to know that, we need to know the difference between two events. So I'm going to create a variable here that I call previous event. And then the end of this function, I'm going to assign it prev event equals event. So now every time we get an event, we store that event in the variable previous event. That means up here, we can look at it and compare it to something. We're going to change this to be minus an event.clientX minus prev event.clientX. And let's actually put a minus here. We have to look at here. Okay, here we go. One more thing I forgot. We need to wrap this to check if we have a prev event already. Whoops. Okay. No. Okay, this is mistake Tuesday. What? I didn't type this. Okay, let's go back. Now, almost. This is kind of right. It's scrolling in the right direction at least, but we aren't taking the mouse button into consideration. So let's add that. It is quite simple. Just say and event.buttons equals 1. Well, almost. We need to remove this selecting thingamajig. And you do that by saying event.preventDefault. Now we don't select the letters, which is very nice. Okay, so this works. We are scrolling, but what is this? This is a global variable. A common way to get rid of this is to create a function that adds all this. And in this function, we return an event handler. Event handler, it takes an event, and this part is going to be pretty much this. And we need to rename the scrollable word here to element. Whoops. To element. And now we can use this like so. Let's see if it works. It does work. One thing that is much greater with this version is that the previous event is encapsulated inside this function. We just run the function, so all of this is safe from molestation from somebody else. It just belongs inside here. A huge drawback here though is that we have kind of dictated what it can do. So you can see here we set the element to scroll left, and that's all we can do. And in order to change this, we need to kind of fling in a bunch of information here to put in here, and that we don't want to do. So let's rewrite this so that we can do whatever we want with the value that comes out. So the first step is to replace this with assigning to a variable. So we say const delta x equals that. Then we're gonna call a callback with this value. And the callback we take here in the input. Because we now take a callback here and we call it when something changes, we can put delta x here. And here we can use delta x to scroll. Let's try it. So this works too, and it's also much more beautiful. Now we basically create a little piece of middleware here. So I'm going to rename this to scroll middleware. Middleware is typical software that sits between two things. That's why it's called middleware. And this middleware, it sits between the event and the outcome of the event. One thing should pop out here now, and it is that we can add a ton of functionality here without dictating how it is used. For example, I could calculate delta y2, and now I can call the callback with delta y2. Add that here. Now we can scroll left when we move the mouse vertically. Oh, that's a lot of fun. If we want to, we can save a little bit of memory by not recreating this delta x and delta y variable. We can do that like this. We create an object when we set up our middleware, const delta, and the object contains an x, which is null now because we don't know what it is, and a y, which is also null because we don't know what that is either. Then, when we have something to calculate down here, we can just assign this to x and y. And then we call the callback with delta. So this is of course this object over here. Now we can remove this and we say delta.y. This is probably not that important, but what we are saving is some garbage collection. Before we took an argument here and we threw it away once it was used. Now we just reuse this memory here, which is, I mean, not a big deal, but good to know. Just a little side note here. It is possible for the V8 engine or whatever runtime that runs JavaScript to optimize this away, but in general this is true. So okay, now we have this nice scroll middleware and we want to do something more fun with it. And what is fun is rotating a bunch of items. So I'm gonna go up here in the scrollable and I'm gonna set an ID on this UL container. And I'm gonna call this items. Now I can access items here. And I'm gonna say items.children. Whoops. And I'm gonna create an array from this, which we loop over. And each children will be an item. Let's set the item rotation to something of delta. Item.style.transform equals rotate y. And we rotate it to delta.x degrees. Whoops. Whoops, whoops, whoops. There we go. Okay, I think this should work. Let's try it. That's not nice. Not nice. And why does this happen? Oh yeah, it is because we calculated delta. We don't have the absolute position stored anywhere. Let's log this number out to see what it looks like. Console.log delta. Okay, so now it becomes obvious that it can't do this, because we just get a tiny number that kind of jumps around depending how fast we move the mouse. And rotate takes an absolute value. We can't just say minus this without parsing it. But since we have such nice scroll middleware here, we can easily add a feature to keep track of this and get the absolute value out here. So I'm gonna take a copy of this object here, create a clone of it. I'm gonna call this clone apps. And we know the absolute value is actually starting at 0, so we can write that in here. And we can calculate the absolute value by adding delta to it. So abs.x plus equals delta.x. And let's do the same for y. Then we can supply it here in the callback. So abs and delta. Now the value that comes out here will contain both abs and delta. So I'm going to rename this to scroll. So this value will use scroll.delta.y, but this will use scroll.abs.x. And then let's log out scroll to see what it contains. Alright. So now we have a nice feature. We can move and scroll with the mouse and have tons of fun. Abs is now the accumulation of all the times we lifted the mouse and pressed again. And the reason we could do this nicely is because we created a nice function to handle the event. Let's take it to the next level. Close this, go in here, and just for readability, I'm gonna wrap this in an array here that I join on space. And I'm gonna add rotate x. And rotate x is gonna be scroll.abs.y. Let's see what we can do now. We can rotate in all ways. And isn't this a beauty? Now I can tell that you're eager to learn how to animate this and give it some inertia. Back into the code, and the first thing we're gonna do is move this into a notify function. So let's cut this out and call notify here. And then we define notify here. No, here. So notify will increase abs, and call the callback. Let's make sure we didn't break anything. Well, actually I can see we did. Forget to function here. So this works, but how do we animate? And I'm gonna teach you that animation needs a couple of things to work in this case. First of all, we need to know when we shouldn't animate. And while the mouse is moving, we should not animate because that will be a conflict. So every time the mouse moves, we're gonna run stop. Then we need a way to start it. And I want to start when no button is pressed. If event.buttons equals 0, then we start. So what is start gonna do? Start is gonna start animating using an update method. So let's create start here. Function start, and it's gonna say request animation frame for update. So what does update do? It runs notify and it starts again. So now we only need stop, and stop will cancel the animation frame. And in order to cancel the animation frame, you need a request ID. And the request ID comes out from start. So let's make sure we define it. Since we assign it when we start, we should deassign it when we stop. So down here we say request ID equals null. And for safety, let's make sure we only start if we aren't started already. So if request ID equals null and the button is not pressed, we can start. So quite a lot of changes. Let's see what happens. Ooh, now we animate. Hopsan. I could see we had a little bit of an artifact there, and it's because scroll.delta was taken from Y, and we need it to be taken from X. Now let's try it out. It's still wrong. This should actually be scrolling. I don't know what's going on. Let's try this again. Ah, what a beauty. What a beauty. These letters just coming through. Oh, what is that? Interesting bug. You know what? I'm just gonna use position.left instead. And also work on the items. Items.style.left equals... What is it equals? Scroll.apps.x pixels. There we go. Now it also has the feature that we can move it beyond its scroll limit. I think this is usually the better approach because the scroll left, having that built-in window scroll is not always that nice. It can be a little bit devious. But also let's turn off these rotations because they're driving me a little bit crazy. There we go. Here we have a very nice scroll. So for example, if you made a game or something like that, having this little scroll, having a menu like this would be pretty. But wait. This menu just continues forever and ever. We kind of want it to stop at some point. So let's add a little inertia value. I'm gonna scroll up here and I'm gonna find the update method. So when we run update, we want to decrease the speed a little bit, and the speed is kind of delta x or delta y. So let's just say delta.x and we multiply it by 0.9. Let's do the same for y. Oh, there we go. That's nice. This is nice. But wait, if we're gonna make this into a game and a reusable library, wouldn't we need to have a way to customize this inertia value? Well, we can make that happen. We can write inertia here, and we can receive it before the callback. then we can supply it here. I'm gonna get I'm gonna have a little bit higher value just for fun. That's a nice feeling too. But let's take a look at what we did here. Now we require 2 arguments to be set here. So we have first the inertia value and then the scroll value. And this is kinda nasty to API, because this means that the first time user of this little scroll middleware here would have to figure out what goes in here. And if we had more configuration parameters, let's say we had inertia, we had speed, we had multiplier, what else would we have? Color, I don't know. But you can see how this will just kind of destroy the function, what is this called? The argument profile. So you never want to do this. But what you can do is this. We default this to some value, 0.8. Then we close the argument parameters thing in here now. We return yet another function. So down here, I'm gonna say return function on scroll, and this is where we take our callback. And let's indent all of this. And now we can separate out the configuration part from the callback part. So if we want default value, we do like this. And if we want to supply a value, we set it here. Let's see if it works. And it does. So now we see we have a little bit of inertia, but it's way too high, and we can configure it a little bit differently. So let's say 0.99. It's going to be very slippery now. What we did here, by returning yet another function inside here, is called currying. So basically we call a scroll middleware. It returns a function which returns the real event handler. So this is kind of the power of passing around classes, configuring them, but using functional programming. This was all I had for today, but I really hope that you got a better idea of how to set up event listeners and some sense of the power of the functional programming path.